It finally happened. It finally happened. MicroStrategy sold its first Bitcoin. Oh my gosh. People are going crazy. Actually, not really. Market's going a little crazy. Market's a little bit down. But this is CNBC, and I made a video before about MicroStrategy hinting that they would sell Bitcoin. I also talk about how much they sold, what's going on with the price, and then what else is going on with Bitcoin. And so this is good to just kind of be plugged into the drama. Okay, so strategies, their shares fall after selling a whopping, it doesn't say whopping, but 2.5 million in Bitcoin. Okay, it's first sale since 2022. So I guess they did sell in 2022, maybe when they were just figuring stuff out or whatnot. But between May 26th and May 31st, Strategy sold 32 coins for 2.5 million at an average of $77,135 per coin, according to a Monday following. The sale comes after the company said it would pivot from Saylor's longstanding never sell strategy in favor of actively managing its balance sheet if it strengthens the company's financial position. This is the second time Strategy has sold its Bitcoin, the first being December 2022. Okay, let's see here. What else did they do? They, according to Monday following the filing, they also sold 801,994 shares of common stock, and they raised 128.3 million in that same period. So just keep in mind, like, this is like a transaction fee on $128 million transaction, right? It's not a lot of money for them. 32 Bitcoin is not a lot of Bitcoin for MicroStrategy. Now, why did they sell that? Are they going to sell more? Are they just testing the market? I don't know the exact answers to those, but today, Bitcoin, it is, as making this video, it's right around $71,210. And it had a pretty big sell-off, I guess, when this got announced this morning. So, you know, last night, right, Bitcoin was hovering, you know, above 73, and it had this dip down from around 82,000. That's a 200-day EMA, and that's kind of been down ever since. If we look at when it had that peak, right, it was peaking up around those levels, beginning of May, beginning the middle of May, and then since about the 14th of May, we've seen Bitcoin just steadily decline. And this has been stuff I've talked about, right? This is seen as normal. This is all part of the normal Bitcoin cycle. And MicroStrategy selling Bitcoin, I actually think it's a good thing that they're selling Bitcoin. Having a one-dimensional strategy of only buy and never sell, it can create issues, right? It leaves them without flexibility when they might need to sell. Now, I still think their overall strategy for this is be a net acquirer of Bitcoin over time versus a net seller of Bitcoin over time. And that's a big difference. And this is something that I actually advocate for anyone that's holding Bitcoin, of course, not financial advice, but is that you should be looking to increase your stack over time, right? Versus decrease your stack over time within reason. Okay, now if you have a ton of Bitcoin and you diversify into other assets, there's a certain point in time where you probably won't be able to do this. But for most people, you could slowly, steadily increase your Bitcoin stack over time, which means you're actually increasing the percentage of the Bitcoin network that you own, right? That's the goal. So seeing the percent of the network that you own go up over time is more important than just acquiring, like having a big jump in acquisition and then saying, okay, this is my new baseline, I can never go below that level. It's like, well, maybe. So let's just use an example. Let's say you've had 3 Bitcoin, 5 Bitcoin. I mean, that's a lot of Bitcoin. Let's just say 1 Bitcoin, okay? You had 1 Bitcoin. And then you get another Bitcoin. Now you have 2 Bitcoin. Great. Congratulations. That's fantastic. But over the course of the year, like, so you start the year with 1 Bitcoin, some point in the middle of the year, now you have 2 Bitcoin. That's great, okay? But maybe you need to free up some money, maybe you want to take some profits or whatnot, and so you sell half a Bitcoin, okay? And you end the year with 1.5 Bitcoin. Did you lose in that scenario? Well, we have to actually do the math and stuff to work out, but from a total, like a long-term view, no, you acquired 50% more Bitcoin over the course of that year. Okay, and so the next year you're starting with 1.5 Bitcoin. You could do that same thing. You could buy another Bitcoin. Now you have 2.5 Bitcoin. And then at one point in time during the year, you could sell half a Bitcoin. And then by the end of the year, now you have 2 Bitcoin. Okay, so now you are continually increasing the total amount of Bitcoin that you hold, that you're not selling, right? Your total exposure to the Bitcoin market, even if at points in time you had more or less exposure throughout the year, your average exposure over time is going up, okay? And so that's something to think about. And so for MicroStrategy doing this, I don't think that's a bad thing, right? And they're gonna manage like, okay, what growth rate of our Bitcoin stack should we actually target? Because they've had massive amounts of acquisition of Bitcoin. I think they have almost 4% of the market of Bitcoin. And so that can make some investors, that can make some market participants unsteady if they have to fully unwind. And over the long term, maybe their goal, right, is at a certain point in time that it's less focused on having 4% of the total Bitcoin network under control. Maybe they want that. Maybe they want their total percentage to go up over time. But since that's such a large amount, maybe they're going to lean more towards the dollar denominated value of their Bitcoin stack, combined with a reasonable growth rate in the percent of the network that they acquire, which gives them more flexibility with some of their other offerings and things like that. So I don't think it's the end of the world. I do think this transaction was probably a test transaction. They probably will end up selling more in the future at various points in time. But as Michael Saylor said when he first announced it, hey, we might sell some Bitcoin to inoculate the market. Okay, so just testing to see how the market responds to their sale and whatnot. And so obviously it was announced, the market took that. We've already been in this bearish pattern, right? Prices went down. Now, is it solely due to that? I can't give them all the credit there, because we also had announced, I think we saw an announcement today that Iran, they refused negotiations. Again, it's back and forth with the US and Iran. And is there a ceasefire? Is it not? Is the war going to end? Is it not going to end? Right? Who knows, right? It's just, all we know is it's going back and forth. And I saw that oil prices shot up 8% on the news. So that could be a contributing factor. Again, also the close of the month, the end of May, happening as well. It's Bitcoin closed, I think, below the bear market support band. So again, we are still on this downward trend right now. We haven't confirmed that, hey, we've broken out. We haven't confirmed that, hey, we've put in, the official bottom, which was 60K in February. So it's still on the table that we could see those levels again or lower for the market. And so all of these things that are happening right now aren't out of the ordinary, right? They're not like some wild and crazy stuff. They're not suggesting some dramatic thing happened, some dramatic thing changed, right? They are kind of what you'd expect given the current phase of the market cycle that we're in and the perspectives of the dominant market participants. So people are still leaning, thinking that, hey, we might see into the 60s again, and we might go lower. Right, we might, see soon Bitcoin pushing down. Maybe we'll get a little bounce here around the 70s, right? We're in the 71 range right now. We might get a little bounce up, and then we might go down, push down, and then test those $60,000 to $64,000 levels. If those break, then we will, it's very possible we can see much lower levels, depending on how a lot of other stuff shakes out, right? Again, there's a lot of factors that can influence the market. They're kind of up in the air right now that we have to just wait to see how they play out. And of course, you can do your research and take a stance on either side of that, depending on what you think is going to happen. And so the factors, just to list them, right? Again, MicroStrategy, more selling. Will that impact the market actually with the liquidity that brings to the market? So that's a question. So if they sell a lot more, how does that impact it? Then we have the Iran war. If that ends, definitively, and we see oil prices go down, how does that play out in inflation, right, across the markets? So if we see a decrease in energy prices, will that show a corresponding decrease in inflation? And will that also then make it less likely that the Fed has to raise rates? We got a new Fed chair in, and so that new Fed chair is going to come out swinging, and he's going to, do new Fed chair things, right? He's going to have to establish some baselines and establish his position because, he's new in office. And so that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. We still have the Clarity Act that may or may not pass this next round. So again, depending on how that goes, if it's a buy the rumor, sell the news type event or whatnot, there's that factor. And then we have the broader markets, S&P and all these stocks being all-time high. How will that impact if there's a pullback? Right? Bitcoin's already kind of decoupled from that. I remember making a video about should you buy Bitcoin at 70K when Bitcoin broke the all-time high before the last halving, right? Which had never happened before. Talking about, hey, and at that point in time, we were entering into this bullish market. And I basically said, hey, look, and as always, never just put all your money into something. But if you don't have exposure, it's worth considering getting exposure, especially on that upswing. We're now facing more of a downswing. Is it still worth it at 70K? Yeah, I think in the long term for sure, right? I don't think there's anything that's completely invalidated the Bitcoin asset, right, and what it's doing, right? That's still the same. And so if you know what that is, right, it's just, again, people's perspectives that are shifting on it. So I think over time it will go up and it will be a substantially higher price than the current levels, but that's a longer term perspective. In the short term, we could get some volatility and see it lower. And so you'd have to be prepared for that. And so again, if you put all your money in, I'm not saying do that, and it dips down, well, you don't have any money to buy down the dip and lower your average costs, especially if that happens over the next few months, which historical trends suggest that is, a likely scenario to play out. So those are just stuff to think about. And then, of course, like the big wild card, the big factor that we have, or a big wild card and factor that we have, is we have the AI bubble, right? We have some massive IPOs on the horizon with Anthropic, with OpenAI, with and Tesla kind of falls into this. Tesla, SpaceX kind of falls into this. They're in that AI category as well. And so they're potentially doing an IPO. Maybe there's just Tesla, SpaceX merger happening. And so what will that do when those events happen, right? Will they suck a bunch of liquidity out of the market? Will they spike high, and will there be a sell-off? So that's something to think about and see how that plays out. This is all coming right in the summer months, which are sometimes slower, less exciting for some of the financial markets. Again, selling may go away, and it's also leading into midterms. So there's a lot of jockeying for position for those midterms. And if there was to be a crash, if there was to be some sort of correction, now would be the time to do it, so that you could, if it was a manufactured one, right, by these politicians, now would be a time to do it, because if you're having some sort of crash or some sort of big correction going into midterms, that's not going to be very favorable for the incumbents, because they're going to be like, people are going to be like, well, your policies kind of suck. Look where we're at right now. Regardless of if that's true or not, because these things are ideally play out over longer periods of time, but that's not necessarily how people perceive it, right? People all perceive the short-term pain, and they may be like, well, hey, summer sucked, right? Prices were high, stocks fell, no one was making money, everyone's stressed out, right? I'm not voting for you, and so that could be something that plays out. So I know the politicians and regulatory bodies are probably, the people behind the curtain are probably thinking, okay, if there is going to be a crash, right, if we're going to, nudge it one way or another, we better get on and get after it, so that we don't have that kind of chaos and destruction when we're running for re-election, because that's going to be a really tough one to overcome for them. So a lot of these things, and if that happens, right, so they say, well, there's not enough time, let's just ramp it up, okay? Then we could see some wild stuff, and some of these like more bearish lower targets may not play out. I don't have all the answers, but this is stuff that I'm looking at, I'm seeing. We're still, Bitcoin's still, again, above 70K. It's still in a solid position. Asset class is still doing what it's doing, and so it'd be cool if we had a balance and we started pushing new all-time highs, and Bitcoin started to become more correlated with some of the things going on. That would be cool. But also, it would also be cool if we get a big discount. And so, understanding that those different scenarios could play out based upon a multitude of factors, and to take your position, are you going to be more risk averse and kind of expect more downside, or are you going to be a little bit less risk averse, take on a little more risk and expect some upside? And if you do, just make sure that you understand the different scenarios, the different things that could play out. So if the market goes against your position, that you are prepared to handle that scenario and you don't freak out and get emotional and whatnot, or you put yourself in a disadvantaged position overall. So that's just something to think about and consider for this. But wild times, wild week ahead of us. Last week was all positive headlines on Friday. Now, of course, we get negative headlines on Monday. So the Friday before was all negative headlines. This last Friday was positive headlines. We'll see. Will this Friday be negative headlines to start off June, to start off, the feeling of summer, or will it be more positive headlines? Who knows? But it's probably going to be exciting, and some wild stuff is going to happen. So that is it. Subscribe and follow along for more. Peace.